Hello and welcome to Breaking Ground on iPropertyRadio with myself, Carol Tallon, the show where we chat to industry experts to get a view on what's happening on the ground and what new trends are emerging within the construction industry. This show is brought to you in partnership with Place Engage, a data-driven platform for more successful public consultation and community engagement for your next development project. Today, I'm delighted to be joined by Mike Ashcroft, founder, and Simon Herod, head of international at EstimateOne. Simon and Mike, you're very welcome. Thank you for joining me today.
Hi, Carol. No problem at all.
Mike, you might just tell us a little bit about EstimateOne for anybody who isn't familiar.
Sure thing. So I guess the elevator pitch EstimateOne is we're a digital tool for estimators and quantity surveyors to better manage their supply chain and inquiries process throughout tender and procurement. So I used to be an estimator, and that was this was one of the more painful and disappointing aspects of my job, was trying to manage that inquiries process. Back when we started EstimateOne, it looked a lot different to what it looks like now. It used to be, calling hundreds of subcontractors, sending out faxes, if anyone remembers what that thing is. So having to send out faxes and printed sets of plans and documentation in the post to subcontractors and suppliers. And so really this company that we've built was about solving the unpalatable parts of my own first job.
Well, look, that's always a great route when you hear a founder actually addressing challenges that they've experienced themselves within the industry. Now, you're both joining me from Australia today. So I'm in Melbourne, and Mike, you're on Phillip Island, just a little away from Melbourne. You might just talk to us about how the tendering process works in different jurisdictions, because of course your technology is being used across Ireland and the UK, but across different jurisdictions, I assume there are regional differences in terms of tendering and also the rules around tendering, because it's become a very onerous area.
I think. Oh, sorry, Mike.
Yeah, I was just going to say. I mean, I think the part of the appeal of our business expanding internationally was just the fact that a lot of the problems and the processes are quite homogeneous despite the different geographies. And so while there's some idiosyncratic differences market to market, they're kind of minor things, and they're relative. The actual big chunky bits of all of these processes are mostly the same, and perhaps unsurprisingly, the problem set that exists market to market is actually quite similar as well. But actually, sorry, Sim, I cut you off there. Yeah.
No, you're fine. Actually, I'd love to learn a little bit more about some of the common challenges, because I know what the challenges faced by the construction industry here in Ireland is. And by the way, they can be different for public and private procurement, but I'm interested to hear, some of the common challenges globally.
Well, I think, as Mike says, they are very similar problems, and one of the primary things that EstimateOne looks to address is just removing the lower value parts of an estimator role. So doing things in email, doing things in Excel, doing things in file share systems that aren't designed for the industry is a problem that's being faced in Australia, certainly, but also in the UK and Ireland. And funnily enough, how we actually started in the Irish market was an estimator called Tim Bailey, who became an estimator at JJ Radigan, had been in Australia using EstimateOne at a tier one called CPB over here, and basically gave me a call and said, look, I've moved back to Ireland after COVID. I'm facing the same problems that I was facing when I was in Australia that you were solving for me. Do you want to get set up here? So that's exactly what we went on to do.
It's interesting. You are not the first international construction technology company that we've interviewed here that have credited a connection with JJ Radigan, bringing them into the Irish market. So they seem to be very forward thinking in terms of the technology, adopting technology that isn't already at play in the Irish marketplace. So that's a really interesting one to hear. So in terms of the trends you're seeing, because right now, we actually just saw in the last week, Turner & Townsend globally released their Irish construction, their latest, global construction data. And we can see that construction markets right across the globe, but let's just focus on the UK and Ireland, are really under pressure at the moment in terms of not just inflation and material costs, but labour costs. I mean, there's pressure coming from all directions. How is that being managed? I don't want to say mitigated, but even managed through the tendering process right now?
Well, yeah, it's definitely something that we've experienced in Australia as well. And I think in the current market with labour shortages, I guess part of our new part of our product offering is the importance of a main contractor not only using a system like EstimateOne to manage their existing relationships with their supply chain, but also find new ways to connect with new subcontractors. With subcontractors and suppliers going out of business, it's really important to continue to make connections and not just rely on the supply chain that you have those relationships with, but proactively go out and say, how can we defend our position in the market, continue to get good margins? And a great way of doing that is connecting with new subcontractors. And that's part of our offering, is to actually engage with EstimateOne's network of subcontractors that can support you in those challenging times.
I would imagine that this is somewhere where there are some specific regional differences. So, for example, one of the criticisms we've been hearing for many years as the construction industry, particularly in Ireland, has come under increasing pressure is that, there's maybe a lack of maturity across the supply chain, but there's also a lack of scale and size because of the size of the marketplace. And that has a very real challenge to it in terms of, when you go to grow your supply chain, it's difficult to do that. You almost need to be eating into somebody else's supply chain. And that's really, that's a problem. So actually, where does EstimateOne address that, or how does it address that?
Yeah, so the way that we address that is that, first and foremost, a main contractor or M&E contractor using the tendering platform, we want them to have these long-standing relationships with their subcontractors where they can see who is rewarding them with quotes and, who should be awarded contracts. But a part of this new offering is to say, look, let's say we're working in a new region or a new sector that we've pivoted into post-COVID. How do we go and find that supply chain? And that's something that EstimateOne offers. So allowing them to have new subcontractors reach out to them and request the price work, and basically just, kickstart that fuel in the fire of a relationship that might then go on and last for 10, 20 years.
Very good. Again, given the challenges that exist at the moment, what we're seeing at the moment is an upskilling of contractors, but maybe, in terms of adopting technology and trying to do things in a more efficient way and a more cost-effective way, because I think maybe outside of the industry, there's a lack of understanding at just how tight the margins in construction really are. And it just means that anything that can improve effectiveness and efficiency will be considered in terms of technology. And that's across the main contractors and the specialist contractors like the M&E and others that you reference. But across the supply chain, maybe their level of tech adoption is not so high. So, do you require the clients that you're serving, the supply chain that you're bringing in, do they need to be fairly well advanced in terms of digital transformation of their own businesses?
No, so I think part of EstimateOne's success from a subcontractor and supply perspective is the ease of how easy the platform is to use, for want of a better word. We make it very straightforward for them to both manage their existing inquiries that they're receiving from main contractors and also go to look for those new opportunities that can help them. And part of that is the ability to allow them to, profile themselves to a new main contractor. So when they're going through that upskilling process that you mentioned, demonstrate the work that they've done previously, their key credentials, that will make it an easier decision for a main contractor to then go accept that requested price on a job. So it's definitely something we're conscious of. And in Australia as well, we saw post-COVID the amount of residential subcontractors, for example, stepping into commercial or into new sectors to really, secure their future position by diversifying. And that's been something that we want to support in the market.
Very good. And actually, it's something we have seen very much over the last decade in the Irish market, this growth of companies diversifying into areas like data centers and others maybe that just wouldn't have been an option 10 or 15 years ago. And now they've really doubled down, and it's been, it's led to significant growth, particularly out, for those companies who are operating outside of the Irish market. But it's certainly an interesting time. And Mike, when you talked about your reasons for founding EstimateOne, you mentioned that your own frustrations and how things have changed. Now, I'm sure a lot is different, but possibly much has stayed the same as well. I recently interviewed the head of a cost consultancy who talked about how different relationships were now, in terms of not just winning, but maintaining contracts as well, that maybe 15, 20, 25 years ago, it would have been primarily relationship based. And that's, relationships are maybe not the primary driver now. Can you talk a little bit about how you've seen that evolve over the past number of decades?
Yeah, I mean, I think ultimately construction is always going to be a relationship-driven industry, right? Like, I mean, it's still human beings that turn up to construct the buildings, and they're the ones that are there managing the process and that sort of thing. So I certainly take the point. I mean, the nature of communication between parties is substantially different to what it was, right? So I think there's probably less phone calls, less face-to-face, less of that sort of high touch kind of relationship management, but more focused now probably on the digital back and forth. But it's something that we continually put to our own head contractors, especially in Australia, is like, look, it's important to not forget that there's a human being on both sides of these exchanges. And so what we're trying to do is actually make the whole process of communicating information between both parties more efficient, but then also actually providing through kind of capturing data and this sort of thing is actually provide you with better insight about how the relationship is actually going, so that you can have more productive conversations with your supply chain when you do have them. Because I think there's often these kind of anecdotal back and forth. Oh, you never give me a job, and you stop pricing for me, and all these sorts of things. And those sorts of things, when you actually sit down and have a conversation about it, when you have data about how the relationship is actually going, you can actually have a proper conversation with them. It's like, okay, well, you've only priced 3 jobs, only one of those, so therefore, all that. So it just provides a lot more color to the picture, and I think that provides the opportunity to actually have better relationship management, provided you actually use this information in the right way, the way it's intended.
Yeah, that's an interesting perspective on it. In terms of resistance, what would be the points of resistance? Why would people not be using your technology? And the reason I ask this question is because we know that the construction industry is often criticised about being a laggard in terms of adopting technology, but actually on the ground, my experience is not that they're laggards. It's usually because they've invested very, very heavily, maybe over the past decade, and they can be confused about integrations and how things fit together and work together, or there can be a confusion if there appears to be some overlap in terms of function. So when you're going out and meeting, I suppose actually let's start with the first part of that question. When you're meeting new potential clients, contractors, specialist contractors, where are they in terms of their tech adoption journey?
Yeah, it's obviously it varies between customer to customer, because we service, the tier ones in the market down to, small, medium-sized businesses. So I think it's going to depend on the customer to some extent where they are in that journey. I think from an Irish perspective, everyone I've met has been fairly far along in terms of digital adoption. I certainly wouldn't say that they're laggards in any way, shape or form. I think typically people have a sense that using a system can mean using email and using Dropbox or file share. And that's part of the challenge that we face, that they have a sense that they do have a system for tendering or for procurement, but in our eyes, it's I guess, a manual process when you compare it to something like EstimateOne or an e-tendering solution. So that's, I guess, the real challenge to get in the door, and especially for estimators who have done something like Mike would have been 15 years ago before he came up with the idea, doing something a certain way and just showing them that there's value to be gained there.
Again, this always comes down to, we talked about how the margins in construction are very tight, but actually, we work across the prop tech space as well. So helping, real estate companies maybe on the other side of the transaction adopt technology, and the margins are not as tight there. So actually, they can be not as good customers in a way, where it's actually with construction, if you can make the business case for it, then actually there's an imperative on the company to achieve savings, to achieve time savings, to achieve savings on program. So actually the business case really is what is the differentiator in terms of a construction technology provider winning the trust for a test pilot, a project case, or something like that. So in terms of the business case for EstimateOne, are you able to prove the saving in terms of labor hours, time, cost? What's the business case you're putting forward?
Yeah, so very much that. So the time saved in both the inquiry process itself, as well as the managing of trade packages, and then also sort of downstream, once those inquiries are in market, the amount of time saved in tracking responses. With email and file share, you have no oversight into who's downloaded documents, which set of documentation they're pricing off, if they're going to be quoting. And I think, to your point before on challenges, that we've brought in a free trial in Ireland and the UK, which isn't something that we offer in Australia, because it's amazing that sort of after seeing the demonstration, you might find that resistance of, are we going to see that value immediately? And it's hard to sort of quantify it in your own business. But as soon as they start that trial period and they can feel for themselves the time saved in that process, then it's a greatly different perspective once you've done it a couple of times.
Yeah. I reckon I'd just add to that. It's one of those things where I think in Australia we probably, and I think the same thing will happen in Ireland, is like we kind of get you interested and on board with the efficiency, right? Like we kind of lure you in with the efficiency promise, which you kind of have this operational imperative to actually do that under all circumstances in a low margin business. But then once you start using it, actually what keeps you in it is this ability to control risk throughout the process in a much more sophisticated way. And then having that access to the network when you need additional coverage, which is usually directly descendant from some insight that you've got throughout the risk management process. And so that's, I think, we kind of, when you're dating someone, it's like, you get them in with the good looks and then you keep them with a great personality. I think the risk management is the great personality and the good looks is the efficiency.
Well, it's good to know you have the whole package there at EstimateOne, so that's a good one. One of the questions whenever I'm interviewing, say, construction leaders, I always ask them, what is the business of construction? Because actually, I think the business of construction is really poorly understood outside of those in construction. And so when I ask the question at a really simple level, I generally get one of two answers. I either get, it's about people. So if we can get the right people, then they go out and build. So actually, for a main contractor, it's all about getting the people, the skills, and making sure they retain the best people and keep them upskilled to the highest level. And after that, the people take care of the project. But if not the people, the second most common answer I get is it's about de-risking projects, because all construction inherently, it's a very risky business. Property development is a riskier business, and property developers manage that by loading as much risk onto the contractors as possible. So actually then the contractor's business becomes about de-risking. And that's a challenge that has become, it has become much more onerous in the past number of decades. And, contract negotiations are less about price and program and more about shuffling risk to try to get that balance. And I would say in Ireland, we probably haven't done that balance. We haven't gotten that balance very well. I think main contractors were carrying an inordinate ratio of risk. And that's something they're only now trying to get to grips with, which actually is feeding into costs. But it's never one of the issues that comes up when we talk about increasing costs. But we know contractors trying to rebalance that sharing of risk is a huge problem. So for any main contractors or specialist contractors listening in today, can you maybe just dig a little bit deeper or share a little bit more about how using EstimateOne can actually help de-risk the project? Because access to subcontractors is another issue, but it's almost a secondary issue at that point.
It's a good question. I think, and look, I don't think risk balance in head contracts is something that we could spend 3 weeks debating and probably still not get a good answer on. But I think, we've seen this in Australia too. So you need to have confidence to your first part, which is assembling a team, right? Effectively, that's what you're doing during a bid process. You're trying to get two things. One is you're trying to get price signals that you have confidence in. And usually the confidence in the price signal comes from who is providing the price. And so what we're trying to manage, I guess, in this throughout the tender process, right, is kind of creating as much confidence in the decisions that a main contractor is making, that they have assembled the right team at the right price. And I guess it's easy to observe when you get that wrong, because and most main contractors probably globally for the last 2 years have been getting price absolutely wrong, largely as a consequence of this risk kind of sandwich that they're all being forced to eat, which is basically just full risk transfer to the main contractor. I think the price stuff is kind of leveling out. And so now what we're looking for again is, I guess, coming back to that original concept, which is like, how do I manage all the risks that I can observe? And the challenge with a lot of this stuff is if you're not even observing the risk, then you can't manage it properly. And I think that's where this supply chain risk can really bite you, is because you don't know what you don't know, right?
Yeah.
So I hope that's answered your question, but I think
it has. Well, I think that this is kind of an ongoing huge challenge for the industry, and I think that I don't know, is it ever one that's going to be settled? I think there will always be the pushback of the different parties, because again, I believe at its core, the business of construction, yes, it's about people, but actually it is about de-risking a project in order to make it viable, to be able to deliver it. And if we push too far in any direction, then actually this is where we see kind of the institutional failures. It's where we see the big companies fall down, and that's a threat. If it's one big company, as we've seen in the UK, if it's one big company, then that's a threat to the entire ecosystem. So actually we don't want that. It's not about pushing as far as you can go. It's about getting the balance that makes the industry sustainable, and sometimes that's bigger than any one organization. So I think that's kind of an ongoing conversation that will be happening. And look, I am conscious of your time. Thank you both so much for joining me today, but I just have one final question, just because it's one that actually the construction, like individual contractors within the construction industry are tackling in Ireland right now. And that is, we speak to main contractors who might be primarily focused on the Dublin and Greater Dublin area, and they win a big contract in, maybe Tipperary or in Cork or somewhere across the Munster region, and they don't have that established supply chain there. They're going in, and again, as I mentioned at the start, our supply chain is not expanding at the rate that construction is expanding, which means if you're trying to tap into a supply chain, you're almost inevitably going in to eat somebody else's lunch. You're going in to take somebody else's what can we do to actually grow this supply chain so that there is more for everybody, like that there's greater access? What can we do to help the supply chain develop and bring them along with us?
Well, I think that's part of that for us, is making sure that we can, as part of our offering, provide main contractors who are looking to price in new regions and new sectors just have information available to them of the subcontractors in that area who are actively looking to price. And it's, it's not eating someone else's lunch. It's that subcontractor is there and, wants to proactively win more work to shore up their business and grow their business ultimately. And without a place to make those connections, it's very difficult for everyone to go and build where they want to build. So whether it's, someone wanting to build a data center in Germany or outside of Ireland or in the UK, I think having a system in place that isn't just Google Concreter in Tipperary, you've actually got a place that you can find this subcontractor who wants to be connected with and wants to build new relationships with main contractors who are looking to do better things.
Yeah, I think that's a really compelling point for contractors, looking at the challenges we see that we're hearing about on a daily basis. In fact, after I finish this interview, the first thing I'll be doing is writing a press release about a main contractor who has won a large contract in a new region. And this is not about building brand awareness. It's not about even highlighting their win. They're actually doing an active call out to the supply chain locally saying, hey, we need you, come talk to us. And I don't think 10 years ago, the route to doing that would have been to issue a press release in the local media. And yet that's what's on my schedule.
Well, Carol, send them our way. We'll be more than happy to help.
Good.
So look, they need an EstimateOne account too, and maybe a copy of this too.
Oh, I like it. we like our keep cam. It will all be grand. I like that you have the manual for doing business in Ireland at your hand. That's a very important one, Mike. So listen, guys, Thank you so much. You might not be just solving our clients' problems. You might be solving some of ours too. So that's good to know. Listen, thank you so much. It was great to chat to you both today, and I appreciate while I'm at the start of my workday, you're both probably beyond the end of yours. So thank you so much for being so obliging with your time. I appreciate it. That's all we've time for today. My thanks to Mike Ashcroft, founder, and Simon Herrod, head of international at EstimateOne. And also my thanks to show producer Katie Tallon and to the production team at Hear Me Roar Media. If you enjoyed this episode, please be sure to subscribe to the podcast and check out all other real estate and construction shows on iPropertyRadio. Before we go, just a special word of thanks to our sponsor, Place Engage, for supporting our podcast and making these conversations possible. And thank you indeed for tuning in. We'll catch you on the next episode of Breaking Ground on iPropertyRadio.